From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. Oregon's primary election is almost here. Your ballots must be postmarked by Tuesday or in a ballot box by 8 p.m. that day. In this episode of Straight Talk, we sit down with a panel of political analysts to get their take on the importance of this primary, the races they're watching, and what it all could mean for the general election matchups in November. Let's meet our panel. Rebecca Tweed has been part of our KGW election panel for several election cycles. She's a well-known and respected Republican strategist. She's the president of Tweed Strategies, a political consulting firm. Tweed has worked on more than 70 political campaigns for local government, legislative, and statewide candidates, plus county and statewide ballot measures. Annie Ellison joins us as our Democratic analyst. Ellison is the executive director for Emerge Oregon. Emerge identifies, trains, and inspires Democratic women to run for all levels of office. Ellison has crisscrossed the country working on campaigns for progressive Democrats from statewide to state house offices, city council, and Congress. Also joining us, Andrew Hoan, the president and CEO of the Portland Metro Chamber. Among the Chamber's missions, supporting a clean, safe, vibrant downtown and resilient economy. Hoan will give us the broader view of what he thinks this primary means for the Portland Metro region. Welcome to my guests, Annie Ellison, Rebecca Tweed, and Andrew Hoan. Welcome to Straight Talk. It's so nice to have you here. Thanks for being on the panel.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Well, this is kind of a unique presidential primary. We don't really have a lot of excitement at the top of the ticket as far as a presidential primary. It's not competitive. We don't have a governor's race. We don't have a Senate race. So what do you think is going to drive turnout? What's exciting you? What are you watching? Let's start with Annie, our Democratic analyst.
Yeah, so in a word, women. So women and down ballots, right? So if you're Emerge, right, we recruit and train Democratic women to run for office and win. That is really exciting for us, right? So it's the down ballots, it's the congressionals, it's the county races, it's the smoking hot primaries for the state house. I think that is what's driving, that is what's going to drive turnout. I talked to a Democrat earlier today who's usually voted by now, and she was like, I'm still sitting on my ballot because I feel like I can't make any good decisions yet because I don't know any of these people yet because we haven't been getting communicated with the way we usually would have been by this point. So. I think it's exciting time for women running down ballot. So it's an exciting time for all of us.
And Rebecca, from a Republican point of view, what are you watching?
Yeah, I am the resident turnout nerd. So I think turnout always gives us a great indication of what's to come. It lets us really know where voters are sitting. And we see the lowest turnout that Oregon's ever had in the primary right now. And I'm excited for that one to uptick. I think that'll increase as it always does as we get towards election day and people make their decisions. But because the down ballot races are driving things, I think we see a big opportunity for shift in Oregon at city council, at county commission races, which have some of the most competitive campaigns, things we haven't been focused on as much. And then, of course, in the Portland region, some really serious, significant change, right? A very competitive DA race, congressional seats changing for the first time in over 30 years. I mean, there's a lot of energy that I think by the time 8 p.m. on Tuesday comes around, voters will have engaged with. Then we get to see what that means for November. I'm excited for the message that sends.
And Andrew, what do you think? What's at stake here?
I totally agree on all these, especially on the down ballot issues, but I think the livability question is on the ballot. And I say that because you look at the county principally responsible for homelessness, you look at this DA race, this is about public safety, and what are the top of mind issues for voters? That's it. And I agree, I'm very hopeful that the turnout changes dramatically, but let's be honest, I think we're seeing disillusionment, a lack of faith and trust in government playing out in people's lack of voter enthusiasm right now. We need that to change dramatically. So I think these are all big issues, but we're hopeful this does turn around because these are the prime things voters are concerned about right now.
Well, let's build on what you said about livability issues. Rebecca, what is driving the political machine as far as what people care about this time around compared to, say, 4 years ago, and why does it matter?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I would say this, for the first time in probably a decade, actually, we're seeing economy, quality of life, taxation, popping up to the number 1 or 2 issue that Oregonians are concerned about. Public safety continues to be number 1 and the pieces from that, but the down economy is really impacting people's decisions in their pocketbooks, and we're seeing that with levies that are being introduced. We're seeing that in messaging that we haven't had to see for quite a while, where you actually see with Republicans who's now the more conservative person on taxes. We haven't had to talk about that for a little bit. We've talked about other policies. That's really coming back, and I think where voters and residents stand on public safety and crime and where they stand on their quality of life is going to really drive that turnout. So having these significant races in Portland where those issues really get heightened, even though we've got a full rest of the state, but that's, takes a lot of the attention. How voters respond to that is going to send a message to our actual elected leaders as well, I think.
And Rebecca mentioned a congressional seat that's open for the first time in over 30 years. Annie, a couple of retirements really started this chain of events, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you get this cascading effect that is unique to, a district that the registration advantage for Democrats, sorry, Rebecca, is so great that, we can't get the Democrats going to win.
We're never
right?
going to be there.
Exactly. And so you get this, so when it's we'll call it a safe district with no term limits, right? A retirement like Congressman Blumenauer's can set off this cascading effect that, Maxine Dexter has had this meteoric rise, right, through the House. She's the chair of the Housing Committee. She's in her second term, right? Mm-hmm. It is highly unusual for someone on that trajectory to just be like, no, I'm going for it. So it's you see that risk taking,
and
right?
This is in District 3.
Yeah, in District 3, for Congressional District 3. So you see her take that risk, leave that seat. We got 3 people rushing in to her seat, which is also a fascinating race I hope we talk about later. Secondly, you get a Sushila Jayapal saying, I'm going to take the risk too. I'm going to jump in the congressional. Opens up this big county commission race. So it is, again, it's just a really exciting time for the down ballots and for movement. And literally that was one retirement that it set all that off. So it's really exciting.
Well, you all mentioned the Multnomah County District Attorney's race. So let's dig into that. I'm going to set the stage here for us. Incumbent Mike Schmidt facing a tough challenge from one of the senior deputy prosecutors in his office, Nathan Vasquez. Voters elected Schmidt in a landslide in May of 2020, won with 77% of the vote. He ran on a progressive platform of criminal justice reform. He took office in the middle of the pandemic during racial justice protests. And since then, a lot of people have blamed him for a rise in crime, open drug use on the streets, a reduction in prosecutions. And then we have Vasquez, who's promised to beef up enforcement of low-level crimes, make Portland streets safer, and rebuild the partnership with law enforcement. Annie, when we were talking, you've called this the backlash election in a certain regard. Expand on that when it comes to this particular race.
I mean, look, I don't have to call it the backlash. The Oregonians polling could tell you that we're in a backlash. Your neighbor could tell you that they're mad. Voters are upset, right? And I think that it's no longer 2020. We have a fentanyl crisis on our streets. There is flight from downtown Portland. I have yet to talk to a political operative around the country that has seen the kind of numbers we're seeing downtown that I'm sure Andrew's always tracking. And I think, people are upset. And so they're going to vote. We have 2 types of emotions in politics, right? There's hope and its best friend pride, and there is fear and its best friend anger. So it's people are mad, people are voting with that. What I'm really actually interested in is where do they take those emotions out, right? It's do they take it out on the taxes? Are they no more tax, that's it, I'm taking it out on the taxes?
Because we have a lot of measures on the ballot that are taxes, either keeping the same, renewing levies, or a couple of new ones.
Or do they take it out on a person, right? The ultimate, we're talking about the DA's race, and that's that is a referendum on how things are going, right? People are mad about how things are going. I think that I don't have to call it that. The data will tell you that.
Let me have Andrew jump in here, because you do know about voter sentiment. You do watch the polling, and we should say your organization has backed Vasquez.
Yeah, so we have endorsed Nathan Vasquez. I'll share that, we feel we've worked very collaboratively with DA Schmidt. So this is really about a few things converging all at once. And to your point, since the late 2000s, we've been tracking voter sentiment. In 2017, crime was a statistical margin of error. in voter turnout and voter sentiment. Now it's the number 1 or 2 issue. And that is a reflection of how people are experiencing the region, and they should not feel bad about having those feelings. That is a real thing. It's impacting people's livelihoods and what they experience on the street. And so what I think we're looking at here really is an opportunity for people to elect a candidate that is going to carry out their sentiments. And in this case, you have Vasquez, who is promising to return collaboration with law enforcement, where people have been seeing that fractured nature between different elements of the criminal justice system. So I think that's key. There's a significant amount of concerns about how DA Schmidt has managed the office itself, with a lot of allegations have come out. So looking for qualified management and execution on the basic promise of government to deliver public safety. That's what this election is really reflecting, and voters should go for it here and decide for their own interest on what is going to return a sense of public
It'll be interesting
safety.
to watch, because there's been some discussion if there's a low voter turnout, it might actually benefit Mike Schmidt, that the progressive Democrat might get out to vote. There's been some outside money, so we'll see what happens on election night. But Rebecca, I want to ask you about Measure 110, the measure that legalized possession of small amounts of drugs. Of course, that was reversed by the legislature in the past session. But how has that impacted not only this DA's race, but races across the state?
Sure. I think the fallout from Measure 110 and the implications it's had around the state, not just in Portland, have been significant. And a lot of those are specifically related to what has happened in Portland, right? So I'm not involved in the district attorney race, but what's happened in Multnomah County impacts every other campaign I'm working on right now, because that crime issue has come up, because of lack of accountability, because of incompetence. And it's the candidates' distinctions to say, well, we're the DA, we're not responsible for the county's lack of funding, or we're the county, we're not responsible for crime. But the rest of the state is watching that. And Measure 110 is a significant aspect of that, because people have seen what that looks like, what a one-size-fits-all policy comes from. I think a really important thing about 110 I want to sneak in there is we are blaming often elected leaders for Measure 110, when we have to remember that voters put that through, and how it was handled, and the repercussions of that on a crime system or other funding apparatus or resources that are available come from that. But voters voted for it, realized it wasn't as perfect as it sounded, and people that were had the responsibility to apply the law and to apply that didn't do their job. And so around the state where folks did not support Measure 110, and then you see the fallout in Portland, then in those communities, east or south or wherever, they're saying, okay, we're going to handle this our own way. We need to look back at this being more local and not just this. Or we're not Portland. We don't have those drug problems. So stop, pigeonholing us with the crime problems that Portland has. But it's a topic that continues to come up. And if
let me jump in here, because
Sure.
we're running out of time, and I want to make sure we get to the District 3 congressional race. And this has come up earlier about Congressman Blumenauer retiring after serving in that district since 1996. We have 7 Democratic candidates, 3 Republican candidates, but really 3 frontrunners in the Democratic primary in Maxine Dexter, that you mentioned, Annie, Sushila Jayapal, and also Eddie Morales, a Gresham City Councilor. How do you size up this race, Annie?
I mean, look, again, the cascading effect, and also, by every measure that you win an election, right? By communicating the most, by raising the most money, by spending the most money, by having a strong message. Maxine Dexter, I took a look at these numbers, and just the outside spending, right? The positive Maxine and the negative Jayapal, it's like $5 million in the Maxine column.
So we're talking about
right?
outside expenditures affecting this race.
Oh yeah, and then you have the just the hard side, right? Maxine's been on TV the longest. I don't think Morales is even up on TV right now, right? Sushila didn't go up until I think week 1. So I think by every measure, it's Maxine.
And the role of this outside money, Rebecca, has a big impact, right? It's not only in the 3rd district, we're seeing it in the 5th district also with the 314 Action Fund giving money to Janelle. We're actually buying advertising on behalf of Janelle Bynum. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact of that outside money?
Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're spending campaign dollars, money is money, right? A dollar is a dollar. So for candidates, they're looking to have as much money or as much resources as possible to spend. I don't know and haven't seen yet that while voters will respond that campaign funding is a top issue or they care about it, it doesn't impact outside dollars versus inside, doesn't really impact how they decide to vote at the end of the day. What that money does, though, is it buys credibility with other political insiders that are inside money, right? If you're getting all the support from national organizations or certain groups, now your Oregon-based funders and stakeholders are saying, well, if they're taking you seriously, we'll take you seriously. So if they give you $100,000 or put 100 into the race, we'll put in 50 or we'll put in 250. So it's a ripple effect. The dollars themselves have an impact. I still don't think, even though we like to say we don't want outside money, we don't want outside influence, I think we all agree with that, but it's hard to distinguish that when you're just even a regular voter if you don't know how to look for things.
Let you jump in
trying to watch Hulu.
Just briefly about campaign finance limits and that locally you oppose them and you say they really haven't worked.
Yeah, I mean, we've done this to ourselves to some degree where we've said this is what we want and we've limited the ability of candidates to actually raise money and communicate with voters. I mean, this may shock people, but campaigns actually take resources and we have so restricted.
There's still time to donate to your candidates, by the way.
But I think the result is that people are going to communicate with voters some way, somehow. And that's just a reality. So we're going to have to take a look at that again because it's ridiculous to pretend that money is not involved in campaigns.
Well, let's touch on the 5th Congressional District. That's the one that is now represented by Republican Lori Chavez Dreamer. She won it last election against Jamie McLeod Skinner, who's once again running in the Democratic primary against 4-term House lawmaker Janelle Bynum. How does this matchup look, do you think, Annie?
I mean, look, from what I can tell, more than one poll has Janelle up. There's also that's all within a margin of error. I think, you have to think about these races, right? We're talking about races in the May election, but it's like, how do you win is how do you score goals, right? So in an election like the DA, the electorate, how you win, how you score goals is different than in a closed primary electorate, right? In Oregon, you have to be a registered Democrat to vote. That the DNA is different from these electorates, right? And so how you communicate with them, they tend to be older, they tend to be whiter, they tend to vote a little earlier, right? Which is why I think we're all kind of like clutching our pearls about like where's the turnout, right? Only Rebecca has them on, but I'm touching them, you can't see them.
I will touch them as well.
So anyway, but I think in that, Janelle's, the question you have to answer in a Democratic primary is like, who's the real Democrat? And I think what makes this race so interesting is that for cycle after cycle after cycle, like Jamie McLeod Skinner has been the Democrat, right? She's been running in these competitive races. She's had these, some fantastic wins. And I think also Deschutes County, like how many Democrats move to Deschutes County every day, right? Like we should look that up. But Deschutes County could deliver this primary.
Well, let me have Rebecca weigh in here.
Yeah.
How does each of these, and we just have a quick minute
Sure.
before we have to go to a break, how do each of these candidates, Jamie McLeod Skinner, Janelle Bynum, match up against Lori Chavez Dreamer? Does
There it
she
is.
have to worry
There's the
about it?
question.
Yeah, I think she should take this as seriously as every campaign she's ever had, right? I mean, we're back into a presidential year. She's being challenged, so she's the incumbent. So she has more to prove than the two who are opposing her. They're in their own battle right now with an electorate that's going to be eager to vote in November, right? And so I don't think that Congresswoman Dreamer should feel nervous because she might get beat in November, but she should be prepared for a very competitive race. And when you look at turnout, it's not just how many people are voting, it's who is voting. And people like us exist to make sure we're talking to the very specific people that will vote for our candidates. And in a primary, that's even more important because, as you said, Democrats are trying to out-Democrat each other. Republicans are trying to out-Republican each other. When we get to the county commission race for Clackamas, even though it's nonpartisan, that issue will come up. So trying to get the right voters to turn out for your people matters now. November, it's a quantities game.
And we'll see a lot of money in this race.
I'll say fun twist in this race. There's a GOP. I just kind of learned about this today. Republicans are spending to try to get McLeod Skinner through.
Because they think she's the weaker candidate. That's very interesting. And the balance of power could hinge on that race in Congress. So a lot of money will be poured into it in November. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll take a look at the Multnomah County Commission races. Stick with us. We're back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. We're looking ahead to Tuesday's Oregon primary election and some of the races to watch. Welcome once again to our panel, Republican strategist Rebecca Tweed, Democratic analyst Annie Ellison, and from the Portland Metro Chamber, Andrew Hoan. Thanks again for being here. This has really been super interesting. I wish we had an hour, but we want to touch on the Multnomah County Commission races because they really are so important. 4 of the 5 seats are up for election. Only Chair Jessica Vega Peterson isn't up for re-election. What do you think, Annie? Are we going to see a realignment of county priorities? The county commissions really had a hard time addressing some of the important issues in Portland, like homelessness, drug use, behavioral health issues. How important are these races, and what are you watching?
Yeah, so I'm watching District 2, so the one vacated by Sushila Jayapal. Did I get the number right? I did. Mm-hmm. Okay. The other 3, Julia Brim-Edwards, it's hers. The other 2 I think are marginally more competitive. I think Vince Jones-Dixon gets it as well. So the ones we're watching are 2 and 1. And what's interesting about that race is you've got we're talking about this backlash, right? We're talking about voters being mad. I think there is an agreement that the status quo is not okay, right? And it's like, who are they going to take it out on? And this is one of those races that doesn't usually get a lot of attention, but voters have some feelings about the county. The good people of Reddit have some feelings about the county, and so this is kind of this, it's like the insider-outsider Sam Adams and Shannon Singleton, and then there's this third candidate who I think could be a soft landing spot for both. Jesse Burke. Yeah, so I think it's a 3-way race. I think we're going to overtime on this one for sure. Mm-hmm. But who it is?
So you mean like the runoffs going into
Yeah,
November?
we're going to
have to get 50% plus mm-hmm. 1, or we have a runoff. What do you think?
Who's in the runoff? I don't know.
Couldn't agree more. And I think this is a textbook. This District 2 race. People should be watching this first. All eyes should be on the county. This is the flagship county of the state. It's the most populous. In this instance, is a great example. Shannon Singleton ran the joint office of homeless services for a year and now is running to hold the county accountable for homelessness. And I think voters should be looking at that and saying, hey, maybe the status quo, running to hold the status quo accountable, is a bit of an ironic twist here. We're just very excited because you have 2 really collaborative other candidates in this race, and Jesse Burke and Sam Adams, who have both union endorsements, business endorsements, and the same is true for Vadim Mazursky in 1. We are very bullish on people that can bring together diverse perspectives. Pay attention to these races, and you'll be probably here again.
Quick look at District 33. That's Maxine Dexter's seat that she's giving up for Congress. Can you just talk about that briefly for us? Amy?
Yeah, I mean, this race is like straight out of Central Casting, okay? You've got the 2 fellas, you got a doctor and a lawyer. And you have Shannon Jones-Isidore, who is born and raised in Albina District of Portland. She's a Marine Corps veteran. She would be the only black woman in the legislature. She owns and operates a treatment center. And so you have these, that's going to be a photo finish. And it is for the heart and soul of the city, which is the heart and soul of the challenges we're facing as a city and a state. This is absolutely one to watch.
Well, I want to give you each about 30 to 40 seconds for a final thought to kind of tie some of this together, what you're looking for in the primary and looking ahead to the general election. And we'll begin with Andrew.
Yeah, so I think for us, first, it has to be a note that we have to be watching for political violence. And that is a key component of what will determine if we have grown up as a community, whether we reject behaviors on the street or whether we are going to just stick with the same old. And I think the differences that we saw most recently during May Day and what happened at PSU shows and demonstrates that Portland understands the difference between protest and between violence. And that's a very encouraging thing we should all be very excited about. And I think in races, people are probably very confused right now about what's the right candidate to be backing. It's those that are running on livability as the prime issues. Yeah. Voters are screaming for it. Candidates are finally meeting them where they are, and they should be paying attention to the track records of these candidates, whether they can deliver or whether it's the same old
Okay, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm just excited to see how competitive some of these races go into November, right? We've seen really competitive campaigns around the state. We've seen candidates that have had to put themselves out there in a lot of positions. Will voters hold them accountable in November, right? And voters are driven by, hope and change or fear and anger, but how much does their desire to have change based on anger with their current situation actually make them change their mind? Oregon has 96% incumbency rate. We re-elect people 96% of the time. In Portland, that's all changing. What does that message send to the rest of the state? Are we going to change there? I can't wait for Tuesday, and I can't wait for November when it's over again.
All right, don't fall asleep. I'm actually really watching the levies.
Well, that's
good.
I'm
Good
interested
point.
to see. So the teacher levy, right? Like, this is something that is passed by massive margins, right? If that margin is smaller, like, that's information for November. That's a harbinger of like where people are at. Additionally, what's the spread in the DA race, right? Because the spread last time was 77%. And so, that's the information we can get for November is kind of what I'm looking at, and those are the two places I'm looking for.
I have to stop you there because we're out of time, but we didn't get to cover all the races. We're going to cover them on election night. I hope you'll join us then. Get your ballot in on Tuesday, either postmarked or in a ballot box by 8 p.m. And we'll see you Tuesday night here on KGW for election results.